Welcome to the land of no easy answers. Our world, though more connected than ever, seems to have forgotten how to connect. Everywhere you look, the disconnect is obvious, from nature to the people around us, and even within ourselves. This is Alex Knight, and thank you for joining us as we attempt to unravel the mysteries of the mind and your universe. Now, let's meet our panel, and it's a little bit larger this week. Over in one corner is Kristin Rumohr.
Yoo-hoo.
And in the other corner, Aaron Stewart. And in the final corner, my sister, Julia Maria.
Hello.
Mother of two twins to be specific.
Or one set.
Educator. And we thought we'd bring her on this week to talk about the topic today, which is very relevant to kids, which is the underdeveloped teenage mind. That's what we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah. Undeveloped and developing.
Yes. And the science is relatively new. There was an interesting article here in Time. It's a few years old now, but it's very interesting because there's the research that came out, which I believe was in the 90s. So in the grand scheme of the timeline of science, that's still like early days, right? You know, we've always had a challenge. I mean, I'm not a parent, but we were all kids once, right? It was always difficult being a kid growing up at, as you go into puberty, you just feel like your parents don't understand you. The world doesn't understand you. You take a lot of risks. You do alcohol, you do drugs. Maybe not all of us, some more than others. But, we don't really assess risk properly. And that's kind of the whole undertone linchpin of this whole article is that we now actually know that kids do not really have fully formed brains until I think their mid-20s. The article says well into their 20s.
About 25.
Yeah.
So that explains a lot, doesn't it? That explains a lot of our crazy risk-taking behavior. Why do we get in cars when we're drunk? Why do we think we can drive faster than the speed limit and make it around a corner? There's so many things going on here, so many things to actually unpack. So I think Julia will be a good addition to this panel discussion today on this topic because I don't have kids, and not everyone here on this panel has kids. So why not add another voice of somebody who actually teaches kids and kind of understands their behavior pretty well. So thank you for joining us today, Julia.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm excited to add another voice and another perspective.
Yeah,
absolutely.
We're very excited to have you.
Yeah, and this show is all about perspective, right? It's not about three people getting together, agreeing with each other, and nodding their heads and saying, "You know what? We're all fantastic."
Oh, thank God, Alex.
We're all fantastic people. We all agree with each other, and that's that.
Every episode of that's 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Well, to that point, I like to this really opened my eyes to not only the teenage struggle but also the adult struggle, because I think in a lot of cases we get kind of stuck in those same loops that we went through as a teenager, and we just assume that must be the only way to deal with being an adult as well. So I think a lot of this will help us to really put a voice to how do we actually address these things moving forwards. We actually have a means of getting out of these loops in adulthood. That we set ourselves up as children for addictive, risk-taking behaviors. And how do you, make the adult brain not do that?
Yeah.
I think it's also we put a lot of emphasis on teenagers being more mature than they are, right? We have a tendency to kind of start labeling them as this is their personality, this is what they do. And it does become a bit dangerous if you don't realize that it's essentially just a primordial soup going on up there for the first 25 years of your life.
Yeah, great way of putting that.
If you then need to use that as a basis for your adult personality, you can change completely. From like 9 to 25, you can be a completely different person because your brain is restructuring itself. And if the pressure is put on you to be, adhering to the same goals, for example, that you had when you were 17, how could that possibly affect you for the rest of your life?
I think a lot of teenagers end up, I feel, the ones who struggle and feel really angsty is because they were placed in a box and you've been told for so many years that's your personality and you're not allowed to experiment or grow or change. You're kind of, it's like that what you said about them, you're mature already, but you're not at that age. And so that's a bit of rebellion happening because they're like, I don't even know who I am and you won't let me try different things. To figure out.
You ask them what the dream job is without actually letting them figure out what that might be.
Yeah. And how much of our education system is geared towards that,
It is.
Prepare for your career, make this decision now when you don't know what the hell's going on in your own brain yet.
I want to talk
Let
about...
alone give you the option to change later on down the road.
I want to talk about the advanced brain imaging that this article here in Time Magazine references, because it wasn't until, it looks like, the early 2000s. So due to advanced brain imaging, it's revealed that the teenage brain has lots of plasticity, which means it can change, adapt, and respond to its environment. The brain does not grow by getting substantially larger during the teenage years, but rather through increased connectivity between brain regions. This growth in connectivity presents itself as white matter in the brain, which comes from a fatty substance called myelin. I think we've brought this up before on the podcast. As the brain develops, myelin wraps itself around nerve cells, axons, long, thin tendrils that extend from the cell and transmit information, like insulation on an electrical wire. Myelination is the scientific name for this process. Strengthens and accelerates the communication between brain regions and underlies a person's basic learning ability. So that says quite a bit right there. It wasn't until we had the brain imaging that, like, look, this is actually proof. No, there's a reason why kids act this way. This isn't, it's not like they're just doing it to say screw you. They're not risk taking just because they want to piss somebody off. That might be part of it too, but yeah, I just remember a lot of the things that I did. Now, I wasn't as reckless as some of my other friends, but I certainly, and I won't even necessarily list all the things because we could be here for a while, but I took some really scary risks and it could have gone sideways. Like there were a couple of times where I got in a car with someone that was high and had been drinking, and we're racing down the streets around corners. Like he could have just easily, I could not be here right now. I could be dead, and that was stupid. I should have never have done that. Right. So again, we did another episode on why do people make bad decisions, and in this case, often there's actually a legitimate reason, as an actual explanation, and it's just because kids' brains are just not fully formed yet.
Yeah.
Well, and specifically, the logic center in the frontal lobe doesn't basically fully form until the very end.
Right.
And that's the part that we seem to forget about, is we keep expecting them to be logical human beings when that part of the brain isn't technically even connected to the rest of the brain yet.
Well, it's not even logic per se. It's almost like that executive functioning, that ability to plan what would be the next step. And if that step goes awry, what would be the replacement next step? And so that's also a skill that has to be explicitly taught. And it's often not. So if you combine that with like the brain not being fully formed, it's like that age group, they can't even fathom that what could possibly happen next could be negative. Like it doesn't even pop in their brain.
And so that was a quote actually that I took from this, from Frances Jensen, who was kind of the author, I believe, of most of the art.
Yeah, she noticed this with their kids.
The main part of it, yeah. But it was that addiction is simply a form of learning. And that part really struck me, because you really think about it, like it's the repeated stimulation of the reward center of the brain, which is more mature than the frontal lobe at that point. And it just makes sense that, of course, the reward center of our brain would be the first thing to develop. And then the logic center that says, hey, maybe you should not do that all the time. right, develops far later. That explains so many of these issues that we have with people, just again, the risk taking, the addictive behaviors, the leading to a lot of the anxiety disorders and a lot of the kind of other things that we have leading into adulthood.
Yeah.
Is again just a misunderstanding of the wiring of the brain. We expect too much of a brain that's just not capable of it. And if we were again to put up supports so that these kids could have the proper environment to explore these things without having the repercussions of having to choose now, and let alone spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to go to college for a choice that you're being forced into now, and you're not technically capable of making it yet, right?
Yeah, Frances Jensen here. She does talks in schools, and at the end of the article, she says she often receives thank you notes from students after speaking about her research at high schools, because teenagers are looking to ultimately understand themselves, right? So I think that's really cool too, because I think it's really easy to, if you think about how you were at a kid, like how many times did your parent, your mom or your dad just dismiss, just call you reckless and call you whatever. They just dismissed it, or like they call you like you were just like a rebel, or whatever it is. It's just like people forget what it's like to be a teenager, right? And now we actually have some evidence that will help youth actually understand themselves. And actually this kind of, because this is what this show is all about, right? I really do feel like science and education really empowers people to do the right thing and make the best possible decisions. So, having this research available to the public, and by going to schools, what Frances Jensen's doing, and by talking to teenagers, maybe I'm overly optimistic, but I feel like maybe by teenagers understanding themselves, they'll maybe think twice about something that they're going to actually do in the future. They're like,
well, think about this. Like, this is the first chance that we've ever actually had an answer as to why.
Right.
A lot of teenagers go through their life just going, I guess this is just what's happening.
Right.
Right. Without
Buckle
ever
up.
without any understanding of why this is happening. What's going, like, what exactly is this thing that's happening to me? And you talk to your parents, you talk to teachers, and they go, And
then they shame you for feeling that way. Or when you make a mistake, they're like, well, why did you do that? You should have known better. And honestly, your actions were based on the limited brain functioning that you had. Yeah, and so you had to make that mistake to learn. And so we want teenagers to make mistakes, but in a healthy, risk is a part of life, but you don't want it to be a natural consequence that is, death, for example, or something extremely negative, but like a mistake they can come back from, right? And I don't think teenagers are really allowed to make mistakes. They're kind of thrust into high school the mentality is kind of thrown on them. Like, this is where you kind of shape up and figure out what you want to do. And I feel like that's more what you do after you leave high school. And you head into university, or you go travel, or you get a job, or you do whatever. I don't feel it's fair to do it I still feel like they're children. You can't do it to them at that age. Say, hey, you got to figure it out now. And then you just kind of leave them be.
Well, even at any age, arguably, right? If we're kind of teaching kids and teenagers from the beginning that it's okay to change. It's okay that you can be interested in something one day and then want to explore something totally different the next, right? And just allow them that freedom, right?
And how do you set kids up for success in that?
I think the science needs to be explicitly taught in schools, and executive functioning needs to be explicitly taught in schools, because in my experience as a elementary school teacher, and I teach up to grade 7. So grade 7 is that prepubescent age. Kids are 12, 13, and they're heading into high school. And I have some experience teaching in high school as well. I find a lot of kids are forced to transition, and their workload triples. And they've gone from being in one classroom with the same kids every day to having multiple classrooms, multiple teachers, all these different inputs of coming at them that they have to manage and organize, but they're not actually taught how to manage and organize themselves and deal with that stress. And then on top of that, they're being told to, like, your personality is already finalized and you need to figure out what you want to do with your life. Like, I just feel like it just overwhelms them.
Is that still a thing today? Because that happened to me when I was growing up. Is that really like the way people think now in 2021?
I would hope not, but I still feel like it's a bit of a mixed bag, and a lot of educators, I feel, are really trying hard to update themselves, but the school system is archaic the way it's set up, and I don't feel it's been modernized to allow educators to actually do what to create curriculum and to teach in a way that's healthier and more balanced.
Well, let's even look at the sleep thing, right? Where at puberty, there's sleep time shifts. Hey, so basically they go through what's referred to as sleep phase delay. So now it's harder for them to fall asleep before 11 p.m. and it's really hard for them to wake up before 8 a.m. Right. And so the idea that we're making these kids get up at 6 o'clock in the morning to hop onto a bus to drive all the way to we
do that because it's just because we've done it. And we haven't actually reevaluated, like, maybe this isn't the best thing to do anymore. And we shouldn't just do it because we've been doing it that way for the last 100 years, right?
Well, and the research links a lack of sleep to higher rates of chronic diseases like obesity, type 2 diabetes, more caffeine, poor impulse control, lower levels of motivation, and impaired attention and memory, which, any of those would be kind of handy at school, hey? More attention at school? You'd think that would be helpful for the kids at school, right? Just letting them sleep in that little bit, being able to go to school when they're capable and at their optimal brain, capacity to be able to absorb information in the first place, instead of forcing them into an environment where they already feel like they're not working at their best. And now we're throwing them into a test environment where we're going to judge them for the rest of their lives based on the score that they get on this thing.
That's not at all daunting.
A little bit.
I would be a terrible.
No wonder it's anxiety and.
I would be a terrible teacher because I'd be like, Timmy, you should live life right on the razor's edge. That's what you should do.
Yeah, that would be a terrible thing to say.
Well, it's interesting when the schools shut down, when the last March, and we switched to emergency remote, I would say the majority of my grade 7 students shifted to doing all of their work at like 7 p.m. at night. So they slept in. We only met like once in the morning, and that was difficult. A lot of them wouldn't sign on. But then we would be getting emails at like 7, 8, 9 p.m. at night asking for help on the assignment that was like currently assigned. So they were working in the evenings and then sleeping in, and they just shifted over. And so it starts quite early, like that sleep shift, and like where they feel naturally energized to work is not the typical school times. And so it was interesting, and the pandemic kind of highlighted how for a lot of students, the way schools are set up wasn't beneficial for them, and that when we switched to remote, some students who had been struggling in the bricks and mortar system, they thrived in the remote system. They did so well, and some didn't, and then some kids were good in either environment. So it just shows you the variability amongst children, and that we shouldn't just have one model. We need flexibility within the model.
That's
exactly.
That's interesting.
Exactly. Some kids might just do better on a remote learning kind of level, right? And to have that as an option where, they don't, if you're going into an environment where there's bullies and, it's an environment you're just not, comfortable with, having that option of just like, I'm just going to take a month off and learn from home. Right? Like, wouldn't that be, let alone that then you would have the school hopefully checking up on to make sure that everything's okay, and that we could have these mental health talks, checkups along the way to make sure that, you're still in the state, you're still doing okay. Do we need to have any kind of talks about anything? You want to come in at any point? And, we could actually address some of the things that might be going on, right? It might actually just help to free up a lot of the school resources to be able to help kids on a more personal level.
I actually feel like we need to have more counselors so that the ratio of counselor to students is more like a 3-to-1 ratio, so that they can have someone who, as they're progressing through their school life and they're getting older and their emotional needs are changing, that they have someone they can rely on who can help guide them through like all these transitions. Because in our current system, we're always hurting for counselors, always hurting for youth care workers and these like essential guides within the school system. And oftentimes in my experience, there's one counselor per 3 schools, and they're like cycling through. And so when things come up, there's no one in the building oftentimes to help that student because they're currently at another location and they're left hanging. And so that mental health component of is really missing in our education system. And I feel like if the ministry took more, looked at this science and gave it more priority, the priority it deserves, then our school systems would be a lot better.
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. And looking at it from where does it all stem from as well, which is what this particular research is interesting, right? If we took that science and then actually use that to make informed policy changes, we could have, say, flexibility in schools, right? So like you're talking about sleep schedules. So if you have flexibility in school hours, for example, if you have flexibility around types of learning, we talked about this in a recent episode as well about there's visual learners, there's audio learners, there's, a million different ways that children can absorb information. So if we just kind of loosened the boundaries that we've established, right? And we're talking primarily middle-aged old white men that have decided these
well, what are you
is
talking
how
about? What?
schooling is going to be
The
structured.
patriarchy, what?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah. But also,
Well, I
it
think-
accounts for the idea that their method of learning might change over time as well. Just because you're a visual learner now, your brain may rewire itself once it goes through this like you said soup phase, right? Where it may decide that now the visual learning thing isn't what I'm used to, and now reading or taking and feeling something is really what my brain is into right now. Hey, and just that ability to kind of switch gears and work with your brain as opposed to having the system work your brain.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a good way of putting it.
Yeah, really.
Might be exactly what we need to look for to give these kids some relief in a lot of cases on the idea that this is their fault. We put these kids into this situation and expect them to thrive, and when they don't, we're going, I guess you suck.
Yeah, total sink or swim mentality.
Yeah.
Yeah, instead of accounting for the idea that maybe they're just not capable of learning that particular way, or this teacher isn't engaging them in a certain, they just need a different environment to do that in,
Julia, do you think it's fair to say that the pandemic and kind of forcing the school system to provide education remotely has really made people reevaluate how it's done and how education is given and what works and what doesn't work for people? Do you feel like that's made any kind of lasting impact on the school system? Are they starting to discuss and figure out what is the next 10, 20 years going to look like? Are we going to have people in classes at full capacity, or do we want to split things? Do we want to have people be educated from home? Is that something that can be done? Is that even realistic? I mean, because I just feel like I'm so tired of getting put. I'm so tired of just boxing people into one way of doing something that clearly there is no one size fits all. And when you try to have a one size fits all approach, you are inevitably making compromises. And that means that one or more people are just going to slowly start being left behind. And we don't really want that. Right? As a society, it's incumbent upon us, for the benefit of everyone, to everyone stay at the same pace and everyone, be with it, because otherwise, we don't want people to be left behind in classes. We don't want that. We want people to leave school and kind of we want a level playing field, right? But that rarely ever happens.
And education should be the leveling of the playfield, but unfortunately it isn't. And I feel like there's more and more discussion about a trauma-informed practice as a teacher.
Absolutely.
And we have lots of professional development days around this. And I feel like the pandemic has altered the perspective of parents as well as teachers about sometimes, what the work isn't as important as is the child happy? Do they feel safe? Because without those two things in line, they can't learn. And so I know my approach as a teacher has always been, and I think it was highlighted more in this, is if your child is not motivated, is struggling, is frustrated, and usually that will show in children as like acting out. They won't actually ever say, hey, you know what? I feel like my mental health is being affected by this pandemic. They're going to act it out in a different way.
Right.
To say it's okay that you're feeling that way. Let's put the work down and let's do something else that helps you feel safe and happy as much as possible in this circumstance. Because I just feel like trying to force the work to be done is the worst thing you can do in this situation, because they're not going to retain anything. And they're just going to remember from that time that their needs were not important. Their emotional needs were not important. And whether this is informing the ministry and education to change things, I think all teachers want a lot of changes, but I don't think they're going to happen anytime soon, to be honest.
You bring up such an interesting point about...
It's always funding, because we need a total haul of the system, but that's not going to happen overnight. But I feel like, if anything, COVID has started us down that path, and it won't be seen in this generation, but maybe in a couple generations we'll see substantial changes. At least that's what I hope.
Hopefully sooner.
Go ahead, Kristin.
You just brought up a really interesting point about, validating emotions, and particularly the base emotions, right? So when we're talking about teenagers' brains kind of becoming this primordial soup in the frontal lobes, what's important when you're feeling chaos is to feel safety, right? And to be grounded. And kind of what we're doing is, instead of giving children, teenagers, this safety net, we're just making them feel more anxious, right? So it's, no, you need to behave this way. You need to conform. When I just thought it was an interesting point, maybe it's a better approach to say, okay, how about we just, get you in this little cocoon. You're okay. You're safe, right? Validate that. That just kind of makes our baser emotions, our, inner child, so to speak, literally.
Yeah.
Well, from brain scans, trauma brain is different from normal brain. Right? Like when your brain is going through or has experienced trauma, it'll literally rewire itself, and other parts of your brain that will feed that trauma will take prevalence if you allow them to. Okay? And so that's where, again, it's like you said, we have to kind of try to rewire this thing and try to find a way to just understand that, if kids are going through some things, we do need to possibly just coddle them a little bit and just say, okay, look, we need to have a safe environment again, so that we can give them that environment of learning, so that they feel like they're actually being a part of it versus just being told to do it.
And I think an important caveat too to add in is that we are putting a lot of this pressure on the school system to do this for our teenagers.
Parents.
Because you're not bringing in the family unit yet into this discussion, because we don't know what's going on at home. But I feel like it's a lot of pressure on teachers to do all the things. And so it's like every teacher now needs to have like a master's in counseling. Because
especially like you said, if there's not enough counselors in the school to actually deal with it in the first place.
Yeah, I think there needs to be a larger mental health component built into the education system, so that teachers can teach and be supportive adults. And then they have counselors, guides, youth care workers, all those social workers, all those valuable people, more of them in there to support the kids.
Just a brain buddy.
A brain buddy.
To help look after our brains.
Team.
Hey, right? Like, is your brain doing okay today? No? Okay, well, we should talk about that.
Well,
right?
you brought up, we're talking about all this change in the education field, but the pandemic has really brought forth a lot of change and has changed the minds of the average worker, right? There are a lot of people that just do not want to return to an office now, even with it being safe enough to return. People are quickly realizing that work can be done, at home, and a lot of companies are still very much resisting that. And look, I understand. Look, there are legitimate, there are things that like you can't really replace an in-person face-to-face conversation and the spontaneity of just like running into somebody in the hallway. But also a lot of people don't like that spontaneity. A lot of people they find it a disruption. And so this speaks to, again, how people operate differently. People work differently, right? People are productive in different ways, whether you're a student or whether you're working for a company as an adult, right? Again, we got to stop this one size fits all thing and forcing people into that, right? And into, you must conform to this. And, we are starting to see more companies be flexible that traditionally weren't flexible, that said, no, you must come into the office, punch in at 8:30 and leave at 5 every single day. We have to have you here. A lot of companies were afraid that people actually weren't getting stuff done. But it turns out, first of all, a lot of people a lot of companies in Silicon Valley, especially startups, younger companies, they have a different mindset. They've been a lot of them work remotely. There are companies actually that are, mid-sized businesses that don't even have a physical office. There is no building that they all walk into. They have staff all over the world. We have the technology. We use the internet. We've got video conferencing. You can communicate very well with people now, and people have been doing that for years. So people are slowly starting to catch on to this, of course. As of course more people get high-speed broadband, which is another problem too, and another discussion for another day. That I really strongly feel that broadband internet, there should be a baseline internet where like it should be a human right, where you are severely disadvantaged if you have A, no internet, or B, an internet that is so terrible like Kristin's, where she makes it impossible to do video properly.
But that's like, think about this, is that, we're talking about how to reform learning, and a lot of that would be how to, again, reform those parts of our society that don't have access even to the kind of learning that the rest of us might have, and
we are
that
very
is specifically
privileged.
Part of.
Well, and even you don't even have to look at third world countries. There are people in Canada and the United States in certain rural areas where they barely get any internet service, and there are probably some areas that I'm sure very few, but that don't get anything. And I'm sure there are probably older people that are retired that just don't care about the internet, and that's fine. But you are severely disadvantaged without internet now. Right? Think about all the advances and all the benefits the internet has brought to us. We used to, when I was a kid, if you wanted to learn something, you'd go to a library, or, you'd be like, raise your hand.
The encyclopedias.
I was just going to say, raise your hand if you had, grandparents that had an entire Encyclopedia Britannica series, and you'd go and look something up because you wanted to learn something, right? So that's how we used to do it, right? But now that is available at your fingertips. Now you got amazing services like Wikipedia. I donate a bit of money. I try to donate a bit of money to them every year because, my God, the information there, it's
that I use on a regular basis.
I wouldn't want to live without that now, right? The internet, yes, there are bad things about the internet because it's misused. Yes, it's misunderstood by a lot of people, but I think we should also talk more about the benefits that the internet has brought, the benefits that technology has brought, that we don't want to go back to the old ways of doing things. That was actually bad. Nobody misses that, okay?
Look at your book and you're like, God, I hope this is still accurate.
Yeah. So
just crazy.
It's and it's one of the things that I found interesting in light of, and I won't detour the conversation too much, but in the last week or so, the horrific tragedy that we read about here. I don't know how many people in the U.S. Heard about the news in this residential Kamloops school.
I was going to say, we're going to talk about the learning thing on our residential school episode forthcoming.
They found over 200 bodies of dead children that
we should actually say
the Catholic Church basically swept under the rug. And there's a long history. I know. There's a long history of abuse and neglect, with First Nations people. And I found it interesting this week talking to, I forget his name, but who's he's an Indigenous person, but he was talking about how, he's, as somebody who's a bit younger, talking with his elders about all the advanced, we talk about all the negative things about colonialism too, but also a lot of people realize too that are First Nations that they don't want to go back to the old ways either, right? That they don't want to go back to, they're hunting.
Trying to reclaim their old ways, actually. They're trying to reclaim their culture because it was annihilated from them. But I feel like I want to say there are bodies on every residential school site, and they need to be unearthed. All of them need to be checked. Guaranteed there's bodies on every site.
I'm just saying that nobody wants to, in general, nobody wants to go back to doing things that we did, 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago, right? Because, I just feel like we need to work harder at making things better. Let's make technology work for us, not the other way around. I don't think the answer is let's get rid of Facebook. Let's get rid of Twitter. Guess what? You get rid of Facebook, you get rid of Twitter, there's going to be something else new on the horizon that is going to be just as bad, if not worse. Just forget about it. I think what we need to do is we need to come up with sensible policies and hold companies accountable for the mistakes that they make, for the data collection that they make. And also, we are also at fault as consumers too, that, we happily give away free information, personal information, in exchange for a service that is, you can debate it all you want, but a lot of people find Facebook valuable. I find it valuable. Yes, there are things that, there are problems even with their oversight board, but overall, the internet brings a lot of benefits to our lives, right? And I mean, Julia, how would you, teach people now remotely without Zoom? I mean, without any kind of good video conferencing system, without all of your students also having high-speed bandwidth, we wouldn't be able to do any of this. We basically, if the internet wasn't in the same shape that it was now, over the last 12 to 14 months of the pandemic, schools would be shut down. There'd be no education.
But right? I think we have to cycle back then that technology is not going away. But now what's even more crucial, especially with teenagers and kids as young as 10 and 9 years old, having their own phones and having, for a lot of them, unmitigated access to things that they should not be seeing at that age. Critical
but that was a problem when
taught,
I was young too.
And how to how to read resources and determine whether these resources are accurate, are valid, have they been reviewed? All these critical thinking skills are not being explicitly taught.
That is a good point.
And so you can actually see, I find, because again, all those executive functioning skills, they need to be taught during this period where your brain is the most
pliable.
Plastic. Perfect word.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I feel like we see all these adults on Facebook who are reading these Facebook ads or these passed around shared articles that are have full of inaccurate information, and then they're posting it as truth, and they're not critically reading the article or seeing who's citing this information. Those adults were the kids in school who struggled, who were not taught critical thinking skills. Now they're these adults just hawking all this information on the internet, and they're spreading it like it's truth. And so we have to make sure this
has killed more people than anything.
Yeah, we have to teach like these the next generations. Like the technology is not going away; it's just going to get wider and further. And so we need to really make sure that now part of the education system is critical thinking and understanding these resources. And also as a parent, you know, my kids are going to have cell phones at an age that like we grew up not having and having access to all that. And so we're going to have to teach them explicitly, like, this is how you navigate these websites. This is how you protect yourself from pedophiles. This is how you know, if you read something, are you going to believe it right away? Like, I'm going to have talks with them. I'm already envisioning it, like, every day.
I read on Facebook that COVID is a false flag. It isn't real, it's a hoax.
Did we warn you about the megaphone before you came on? Did he actually tell you about the megaphone?
Hey, don't break the illusion.
He's my brother. I walked into the apartment and he turned the megaphone on in my face.
He does that to everybody. That's his thing. That's how he greets people to the apartment.
Yeah. It's his greeting call.
See, and I keep having, you know, you brought up the residential school thing, and so I've just got to cycle back to religion and just how much of this could have been avoided if we just took that shit out of our schools, out of the idea that's any way to live a life without critical thinking, without being able to actually put a logical thought together, but just go, no, God said it was cool. You know, and that we actually indoctrinate kids at such an early age to just not think about stuff. It's fine, whatever. God doesn't want you to know. It comes
back to just having the conversation, which is exactly what we're all about. It always cycles back to this. But, you know, just talking about other alternatives, right? And particularly with kids and internet use and things, instead of just don't do this, this is bad. Right? Sitting down and explaining why it's bad, right? Or at least exposing them to say, okay, this exists. This also exists. Now let's talk about it so you can actually start to form your own ideas and learn, you know, start building these connections in your brain. And what we've done for so long is just from when kids are, you know, tiny, it's this is right, this is wrong, don't ask why.
Yeah.
Well, you know,
that was always my big question when I was growing up, and it has still to this day. That's my main question: is why. You can tell me what happened all you want, but my question after that is going to be, but why did that happen? Like, why exactly? What were the circumstances that led to that? Because that's the more interesting story to me.
Yeah, and teaching our kids it's okay to ask the why, especially teenagers. Exactly. If they have an opinion or they want to voice a concern, they should be allowed to and not be shut down, because then that teaches them that critical thinking and questioning of authority is bad, but we need to do that.
Absolutely.
Well, and the other part is, as a parent, you forget that, you know, by having to teach your children, it makes you better, right? Like it solidifies your position and forces you to actually think through this logically. Like, why exactly does that happen, right? And so instead of just, you know, spewing some garbage at your child, maybe go do the research or accept that there are some things that, hey, I don't know, let's go find out together. We don't have an encyclopedia, but I happen to have this phone that contains all material knowledge that mankind has ever made.
Or new information comes in. Hey, you know what we thought? Turns out that was wrong because of new evidence.
Exactly.
Yeah. And teaching your child that you can change your opinion.
That's the thing that drives me absolutely insane when people argue, like religious people argue with atheists about like, oh, well, must be nice to clearly have all the answers. And I always have to rebut with, actually, no, I never said I did. And that's part of the fun of this, of the whole scientific method of going through life and just not accepting everything at face value, that science is an evolving thing, that there's emerging science. And yes, we are going to make mistakes. We will learn new things. We will change our perspectives. And I think that's the beauty of just living and learning new things. I don't have all the answers.
Well, that's the thing. It implies that they do. And that's my favorite part.
Yeah.
It implies that I have all the answers and you don't.
But you know what? Then they'll say faith. But you know what? I'm no theologian. But from what I understand, if you believe that we are made in God's image, then wouldn't that mean that we were made to be critical thinkers and use science to learn and grow as a human race? Like, wouldn't he have, It seems like he provided us with this brain to do that kind of critical thinking. Like, so to me, it makes no sense, that argument of that, science is bad. Then I'm like, well, why would your God or our God give us a brain that's capable of scientific thinking?
Yeah, and I think just to be fair, there are plenty of people that do have beliefs that are open to science as well. I don't want it to sound like we're saying everyone that has a belief system is stupid and, needs
I think we're talking more about the fanatics.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And I think it should be okay. We should be teaching it's okay to hold beliefs, but it's also okay to change your opinion. It's okay to keep integrating and evolving, right? Because we kind of have it as one or the other a lot of times, right? It's either you believe in this, right? If we're talking specifically religion, and then therefore you are closed-minded, you're this, you're that, or you're the alternative where you don't hold these beliefs and that somehow makes you more intelligent, right? Like everything, there's a middle ground here.
What I find fascinating, I've brought this up before, but I'm going to say it again. I've heard people inside of the church who are devout Christians argue and critically think about words that are, in the pages of the Bible, and they have discussions amongst themselves about, is this the word of Jesus? Is this actually, do we take this at face value? Is this actually what he meant? So they think about that stuff. So why can't they think about the possibility? It breaks my brain. I don't understand how they can think about that and question that, but they can't think that maybe none of it is true, or only 5% is maybe true.
Well, that's my issue, is like, I don't care if you want to believe in the great Googly Moogly, right? My issue is that if you want to push the great Googly Moogly on the rest of humanity as the only answer to, and you'll go out and start killing people who try to argue against. Right? It's the us against them mentality that's my issue with. As opposed
to, this makes us happy, join us if you like, and if you don't want to, hey, that's okay.
Exactly. Right?
It's never an open invitation.
I am the way and the light, for sure. Open invitation, exactly. Where everybody can come join us, right? But if you don't, hey, that's cool.
Yeah.
Right?
That'd be a great sign outside a church. Hey, if you don't want to, that's cool.
Right? I would appreciate that more than I'm going to hell because you said I'm going to go to hell. Like, fuck you.
Yeah. I feel like some of the best articles by scholars of religion and they themselves are religious, that I really enjoyed learning from, is that they really delve into like the timing of when these things were written. And they said you have to interpret it based on that time. And so if we're going to apply this written, text to current times, you have to modernize the interpretation. And that's where others fail, is that they are applying the interpretation. They're not applying it to a modern society. They're still interpreting the text in an archaic manner and not applying it to how things are now.
And thank you for bringing that back to our original topic of how to reform the learning system of today. Right?
I was wondering how we were going to get back.
And and she started saying it, and I was just like, thank you. It's just, sometimes they're just brought to us, right? Where that's exactly where we're trying to talk about here is how do we actually like look at the books of the past and try to find a way to, get the new information to children that they're going to require to go into this ever-changing landscape of a world that we have. And again, having this, dogmatic idea of you read a book and that gives you the information is just not how we do things anymore. Our information just changes too quickly for that to be possible, right?
I think a lot more supports are also needed for parents. And I found so a lot of schools now like that have a counselor in-house or have a counselor that can attend that location on a regular basis. They'll do now like parenting sessions on like how to help your child with, concentration, or how to help your teenager navigate social media and things like that. Because a lot of parents feel at their wits' end of, I don't know how to support my child because I grew up so differently.
Yeah.
And so I feel like that kind of will help bridge that gap, because teachers can only do so much. The family or whatever structure is at home is very important too. But that unit or at home also needs help on how to support their teenager or their child.
Just think about it, like if you haven't been in school in a long time, and now your child is coming home with a book of learning that does, that's teaching things that you were never taught when you went to school, right? So now your child kind of has to teach you, and you're both learning this thing. Yeah. But if you're not really equipped in how to deal with that, well, and let alone you don't have the time, the energy, you've just spent 8 hours at work, you need to come home and do all of this other stuff. Well, now you got to sit and do homework, right? Like, again, if we had, like you said, the supports around these kind of things so that the parents didn't feel that they had to, but that they could be a part of, and again, I feel like parents, give themselves a pass on a lot of this. And instead of taking more of a, a direct role in their learning, that we try to pass it off on and blame teachers for not doing and yada, yada, right? Instead of actually taking that responsibility that we all have for training our own kids on how to be actual human beings.
Yeah, it's interesting because I remember on a Facebook post by someone I knew, and she went off on a rant that my son has come home and tells me that he has a project, this massive project due tomorrow, and tells me he's had no time in class. He's completely unprepared. He doesn't understand what he needs to do. And she pretty much went on to say that her child's teacher was a joke, and how could they leave my child to sink like this and this magic with this massive project and all this stuff. And I privately messaged her and I said, talk to your child's teacher, because I guarantee you he was issued this project a month ago. He was given in class time. Right?
There are two sides to this argument.
He was given supports, and he chose not to take any of those supports, and it ended up being true.
Fucker. Yeah.
So,
but that's where, again, like if we're dealing with someone who just wasn't capable of being there at that point, and now we're blaming them for that, right? I mean, that's kind of what we're getting to here is trying to get past that idea of, oh well, I guess they're just not capable.
Yeah, and some parents will be like, they'll do that. They'll immediately jump to blame the teacher, and then and then I feel like, well, you need to take a step back and think to yourself, okay, if my child was given all these supports and chose not to use any of them, what's going on? Yeah. Why couldn't they use those supports? Those are important questions, Why? And that's how you support your child in their learning. And then you'll have the opposite side, which is the parent will attack the child and say, like, you're so lazy and you embarrass me and your teacher's done all this for you, right? That's not healthy either.
Which again comes back to why, right? Like, why did this happen? Was it just that your brain was just, rewiring itself in the midst of literally, taking parts of the brain that haven't talked to each other in the entirety of your existence and trying to wire them together in ways that have never been done before?
Oh, excuse me. What was that, Little Richard?
What I don't know.
Oh, what is I don't know? Okay.
Sure.
Well, Little Richard's always confused.
Little Richard.
He needs a little help, a little support.
Who names their child Richard now?
Well, and that gets to a good point too, is that this all comes down to a support issue. Right? And this again just comes down to just to reiterate the fact that our kids need help. And we need to be there to help them. And the idea that we're taking money away from schools, not funding them properly, that teachers are having to buy their own gear for children.
Yeah, that's should not be.
That's been happening for
blows my mind. I know, but and that's my problem. Like the fact that we're still having this conversation, that it wasn't said once and everybody went, oh shit, we got to throw more money into okay, here we go. These are our children. And if they don't get educated, what use will they be to us in the future?
You know what I find very interesting is that it used to be like the teacher was revered and teachers were feared, and parents, like I know our parents will often say, like, we were taught to like never backtalk the teacher, and teachers all this, and then something flipped that now, if anything goes wrong, it's blame the teacher.
Yeah.
And so I've always been curious, like, what caused that flip?
And that's in a lot of kind of areas in our society as well. It's personal accountability has somehow gone out the window. It's always somebody else's fault, right? We're just now a finger pointing culture.
Oh, that's a good way of putting it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that's kind of one of the main themes that we try to attack here is how do we get past that, right? Like, how do you get past the finger pointing mentality to a point of we're all accountable and we all need to be accountable?
I think people are worried we're going to make a bunch of snowflakes. That's the mentality. We're going to have snowflake children.
Yeah, that's no good either. That's just too far one way, right? Too far one direction, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think it's a matter of making clear goals for them and forcing them to be accountable to themselves. And again, like understanding that, when you're rewiring your brain, I mean, this may just be tough for me right now. Right. And that we may need to just cut them some slack and, give them a year or two and maybe their brain will have rewired itself to the point where they're like, yeah, okay, no problem. For me, it was funny how when I was a kid, math was always a real, like, I always failed math.
Yeah, me too.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But when I went back after I was 25 to go do the carpentry course, my brain just went, yeah, no problem. Trigonometry. Yeah. Just cosine, sine, tan. Yeah, no problem. Da, da, da. And it wasn't until I kind of got to this point here where I actually went, wait a minute. So the problem wasn't that math was the issue. It was that my brain kept hitting this emotional part of my head and going, no, I don't like this. I don't like this. And just didn't allow it in. And then as soon as I got to the logical part of my brain that could actually let me just get to the, oh, this makes sense. Just 1 + 1. That actually allowed my brain to do what it was supposed to be doing in the first place.
And to Julia's point, if I can just go back to this too about, we know now, through brain imaging that the teenage brain is not fully developed yet. So even more reason to teach things like just general life skills. Like, let's teach kids about finances, how to be a fucking proper, like an organized adult. How do you put money away? How do you organize things so that you have savings, so that you're not, so that you have some emergency money if something bad happens? How do you, like, teaching critical thinking, all those things that we talked about, even more reason to be teaching that at that point in your life.
I mean, maybe we have to be teaching people how to cross the street in high school. Maybe that's the better way of doing it, because apparently these kids haven't figured it out yet. Like, look both ways. That just seems to be lost.
No, it's more of a good luck, everybody, and then they just go.
which is again, like, which is fine if they're equipped to be there, right? We expect kids to be in a place that they're just, again, probably possibly just not physically capable of.
I think it's important too to also not group kids based on age and assume that age group all have the same level of ability. There's a huge discrepancy in ability. Not all 14-year-olds are the same. Not all 9-year-olds are the same. There are developmental differences, and those are normal. And so I feel like a lot of kids will feel behind, or like some kids will feel above average, and then something shifts, and all of a sudden they've had years of feeling like I'm the smart kid on the class. And then, like me, entered grade 8, and then I got, like, my grades dropped drastically, and I felt like such an idiot.
Well, that was actually one of the findings from the article here in Time, was that your IQ changes over time. And so it
fluctuates during these teenage years.
Exactly. Which, again, is just something that, if you're not accounting for that, in this, you would again go into grade 8 feeling like some sort of failure, and why can't I do this? And then you get into these depressive loop cycles that, again, once you start getting them, your brain loves that stuff, right?
Yeah, and we talked about, because I'm guilty of that, and we talked about that in some of our previous, in our series that we've been doing on mental health awareness, right? About being kinder and gentler to ourselves too, and realizing that, you're not a failure necessarily, even if you make a bad decision, right? And it's so easy to self-sabotage, right? And I would imagine, like, it's already hard now as an adult. How hard is that when you're a kid? When you've got all these exams that you got to do, that you've got this pressure of, okay, I'm approaching my last year in high school, and I need to think about, post-secondary, and I need to figure out, like, what am I going to do with my life? That's a heavy question, man. That's a lot to think about, right?
When your teacher's overworked, you have no access to a counselor. Your parents don't have time to be able to help you out either, because they're overworked and they don't have
they got their own shit to
resources. And that's the thing. So if you're basically left alone, in this scenario. It's no wonder that there's, all sorts of misinformation and, if you leave it up to your friends.
We just need to forget, we just need to forget about social media. I mean, the best solution, the best education you can give your kids, just plop them down right in front of the TV. Just let them do that all day, every day for about 15 years. That should be good. I mean, I turned out half decent. I'm like half fucked up. So, it's okay. Oh no!
You're not
supposed to do that.
There's my picture for the YouTube right there.
Wait a second.
Yeah. Well, I don't know about that.
Yeah, I wonder what Julia has to say about that. I mean, you have twin boys. They're 6 years old, right? You obviously
your nephews, right?
You limit their time. I mean, I know how good you are about. Oh yeah, I have nephews. That's right.
No, right. That's what those.
That's what those kids are.
I definitely am very cognizant of their screen time, and they only got introduced to tablets or like any sort of interactive games in the pandemic because we were homeschooling, and I was also working full time from home, and Mama cracked. And but I wanted to wait longer because I do notice teaching that in the last couple of years kids' levels of concentration have really gone down, and I see a lot of kids telling me like they're gaming as soon as they get home, and this is elementary school.
Wait, I just did that last night as soon as I got home from work. What are you saying?
But you're an adult, and our brains, we didn't have that growing up. I feel like we didn't have that another output. And I find like as a teacher now, you're just like that one-man band. I'm flicking lights, I'm beating a drum, I'm doing some other things to get their attention. And it's like I have it for all of 2 seconds, and then the class is gone. And so I find a lot of children are struggling to maintain concentration on one thing at a time, and it's a holistic problem. But I do feel like screens are contributing to children's ability to concentrate and focus.
Sure.
And so, like,
it affects adults too in a bad way, though.
It's very addictive, right? And so, like, I noticed when they got introduced to the tablets, my kids, and they have a limited amount of time they can play, and they don't play every day. Although once in a while it's a little bit more because, stuff happens as a parent, and you're like, if you can be on a tablet so I don't yell at you, that's what's going to happen. But
shut up, kids. Make your own damn dinner. I'm leveling my character up.
I'd rather kids watch TV because it's passive than an interactive game because it's such an immediate input that they become impatient. And I remember when I introduced the tablet, I would tell them there's a time limit. I explained to my kids about brain breaks. I explained that it's not healthy at their age to play as long as they want. And so they are aware I'm going to be in control of the time. And I give them like heads up, like you have 10 more minutes, 5 more minutes. And then when their turn is over, I don't grab it out of their hands. I'm like, okay, your turn has ended. Finish your round or the last little thing you're doing. And then you turn off and you walk away from the screen because I want to build in them that discipline of I turn it off. And it was interesting too with personalities. Hunter had no problem with it, but Archer, the first couple times, had like a big tantrum, and he had like a huge flip out about it being taken away. And I said, "Hey, bud, like this, how you're acting isn't healthy, and this tells me you're not old enough to experience the tablet, and that's okay because we need to be able to take breaks and be healthy. And so if this is, so your actions are telling me you're not ready to do this." And when I said that to him, he was just like, "Oh, but I want to keep playing, so I am not going to freak out anymore." And it was really funny because then afterwards, the next turn on the tablet, he was like, "Okay, I'm going to play and I'll get off when you tell me. I am not going to freak out." And I was like, "Good for you, bud. We're being healthy. We're taking care of our brains." And so, but
that's interesting.
Yeah, I'm very active about explaining the why so that they know why. It's not just.
And that's, yeah.
I'm
taking the
it.
breaks is one thing, but it's also like as a parent, we get into this trap of assuming that it's all bad. And in reality, like the games actually have a lot of actual benefits for children as they grow up. Hand-eye coordination, being able to, take those parts of your, puzzle solving. A lot of these games are more puzzles than you think, right? And so there's a lot of these things that could actually be beneficial for a young mind growing up. Like you said, the break is the main thing. It's doing it for a while and then being able to step away from it. The problem is if you just leave that addictive thing going the whole time, the flashy lights and everything, it'll lead these kids to believe that that's the norm.
Yeah, and I'm also very careful what games they are playing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Too. But I know I still feel bad about it because I would have held out longer because I do see how it's affected their ability to occupy themselves. And, they're asking to play. And so it's almost like I have to reteach them, like, how to play with whatever they have around themselves. And it's only like when we go camping and we're like fully removed from electronics, the kids know there's nothing. They play so well and they're so occupied all day. So it kind of makes me sad when we come home and it's like they know those options are there, that they're like, I don't want to play with other stuff or like make believe or do other things. And so I feel like I've stolen their childhood a little bit.
Well, I would say maybe just start thinking of it like a hit of caffeine. Right, where it's something to be given to them, but you have to recognize that it is addictive, right? And so it's something to be given maybe as a reward for good behavior or for some, doing all the stuff that we're supposed to do, as opposed to, and I don't know. I'm just trying to find a way of making it so that you can, put the emphasis on them having the control over the situation versus the tablet controlling them. Hey?
Yeah. And I try to be really careful, like, to not give it to them, like, after they've maybe had something happen, like, that was negative, because I don't want them to treat the tablet as a thing that makes them feel better. Because I feel like you don't actually teach them properly to deal with their emotions if you're, like, just giving a Band-Aid.
Right.
And, like, we go out and... if we go shopping or we're in a restaurant, like I won't give it to them because to me, it's like you need to learn how to act in those environments. And if I just shove a screen in front of your face, I'm teaching you that you don't have to learn to manage yourself in those spaces. And I feel like that's going to hurt them as they enter, adolescence, is that if they've always had a screen in front of their face, then how do I act in these social situations?
Absolutely, which I think a lot of kids these days are absolutely lacking, right? The idea that your actions actually affect those around you. And putting that screen in front of your face makes you believe that nothing else matters but this, right? While you're stepping on people's toes and kicking over things and, right?
Yeah.
Making everybody's lives around you a general nightmare, right?
Yeah, and I feel like as a parent, like, then they miss out seeing how you interact with people in public.
And how others interact with each other.
Yeah.
I have so much fun people watching, right? Like, just like, oh, really? That's what you're doing? Oh, okay, cool. Right? That just, to me, is just such joy. Just, again, just to the experience of being a human being and just how other people experience it in a completely different way. And this is how you chose to put yourself out there today. That's awesome. Right?
I love that. That'd be a good t-shirt. That's how you chose to put yourself out there? All right.
Yeah. And just me with 2 thumbs up. Yeah.
That's on the back of the shirt.
Yeah, exactly. Good on you.
That would make a good t-shirt.
That's new
But that's the thing,
merch.
But instead of celebrating these weird and wonderful people that we are in all our iterations, we like to pile on and, make ourselves feel lesser than, instead of, we're all the same,
Yeah.
Anyway.
So let's recap. What did we learn today? We learned that kids' brains are underdeveloped, and not much else.
And that often continues into adulthood as well.
We learned that Alex would be a terrible father. That he would just play video games the moment he comes home and not make dinner for his kids and tell them to piss off. And
well,
you would think at least know that's not how you treat your nephews.
Yeah, the banging on the door that you locked behind you, I'd think, would at least give it away eventually. But
yeah, exactly.
Or the closet that you locked them in. Yeah, there we go.
Exactly. Well, thank you very much for joining us today, Julia. I really appreciate you coming on, and I think you added a very interesting layer to the discussion, and I appreciate having your perspective as a parent, as a teacher. I definitely learned some things about how your mind works.
Thank you. It was fun.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah, it was great. That's all the time we have for this week. Thank you very much for joining us. Thanks for watching the show on YouTube. And if you just discovered our channel, please hit subscribe. We release new episodes every Tuesday and every Thursday to keep your brain stimulated. Drop a comment below and let us know what you would like to hear in the future. If you got an idea, a topic for future discussion, do let us know. You can also reach out to us on social media. We're available at the Subvert Pod on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And of course, if you prefer audio-only versions of this podcast, you can find us in Apple Podcasts, Google, TuneIn and Stitcher, and of course Spotify and Amazon, all the platforms where we go. We don't really care how you subscribe, as long as you get the episodes every week. And if you'd like to send us an email for feedback, send it to hello@thesubvertpodcast.com. We've got a new blog that Aaron's been writing like a madman, so we'd love it if you subscribe to the newsletter. It's thesubvertpodcast.com/blog. I don't know why Aaron's laughing at.
Well, it's from the mind of a madman, indeed. Yes.
Yeah, from the mind of a madman. Anyways, do subscribe to that. That's all the time we have for this week. We'll see you next time. And remember, before you go, we're all fucked up, so let's be fucked up together. Bye.